I left high school in the spring of 2019. I wasn't no valedictorian, but got my GED. My folks wanted me to get out of the house and get a job, do something with myself. My mom suggested I check around town, so I went downtown to the Bedford Lumber and More. Sure enough, my pop had called Mr. Jeffrey, and before I could even get the words out, he offered me a job. I started the next day in the stocking department. The work wasn't hard, but it was mind-numbingly tedious. I tried to tell myself it would just be the summer, but come winter I was still trudging on. I ran into Brian Sprouse that weekend at Millie's pub. He was in my year, and though we weren't exactly friends, I knew him, on account of the fact that with only a few hangout spots for teens it was hard to not know everyone, even those who went to the other local high school. I saw that he was doing well for himself. He had bought a car and he had the latest gear. I asked what he was doing and he told me he was working on Sunshine Cruises. I had never been on a cruise, but I asked if they were looking for any more workers and he told me, they are always looking for people and he could recommend me. I received a call from a man called Mr. Burton. He informed me the ship will sail again in 2 weeks and that I didn't need a resume or prior sailing experience. I asked about the pay and I was shocked by his reply. He stated they would pay $2,000 per day, food would be provided, and if I wanted the job it was mine. Brian and I made our way out to the ship on the 20th. It was to be a 3-week cruise. Upon my approach I was a bit taken aback. It wasn't as big of a ship. I thought they must be catering to high-end clients because there's no way they could pay the kind of salary they wouldn't be making any profit. We boarded, and Brian took me to the office quarters, then headed off. Just as I was about to knock, the door opened. "Ah, Mr. Miller, I trust your journey wasn't too much trouble. Please follow me." This man looked like Batman's butler. He had a suit on with a little bow tie and spoke very proper. He gave me a tour of the ship. He showed me the spa, restaurants, captain's bridge, med suite, and we closed off on the employees' quarters, which was on the starboard side of the ship. He then went over the rules and some of them sounded curious, but I've never been on a ship, let alone working on one, so I just nodded. He told me when the guests are passing never to stare at or speak to them. I should not go into any of the guest rooms and not to leave my room after 11 p.m. not under any circumstance. I thought fair enough, but then he said never eat from the buffet or use any restroom designated for the guests. I was then told to report to the galley at 3 p.m. After settling in with all my stuff I reached out to Brian and asked where he was posted. He would be in the bar on the port side, he said. I reported to my post as required and I was told to assist in getting the food plated. These swanky folks were to be having dinner at 8 p.m. They plated mostly rare meats of varying kinds dripping with blood. Other plates had maggots and other worms crawling in and out of the food. After setting out all the food, I returned to my quarters to get some rest. I went by the bar hung with Brian for a little. I told him the galley was serving rotten food as it was funky and crawling with worms. He told me it was a delicacy and very pricey according to the head chef Walter. No guest came by the bar while I was there, but Brian said he couldn't slip me a drink as everything was measured before and after his shift. I had some water and heading out to the sports court, I had the urge to pee. Looking around quickly I didn't see anyone in sight. So I quickly slipped into one of the restrooms meant for guests. It was weird inside. Ultraviolet light lined the walls and ceiling. There was no toilet, only a mirror and towel bar. I saw a small pole coming up from the floor and it began to release steam. I quickly opened the door and exited. Thankfully the area was still quiet and no one saw me getting out. The following day I met up with Brian and a few of the other guys. We were to assist in the laundry department. I asked the other guys who worked if they ever noticed or interacted with the guests. And why we don't really see any of them during the daytime. Isn't it strange? I inquired. Everyone looked away and went quiet. I asked what is the deal. Brian then told me to stop asking so many questions as we're just here to do a job. I decided to just get on with my task. Later that day I was assigned to the galley again and it was the same food as before, not one thing was different, all 4 nights I worked the galley it was unchanged. I always thought ships went to ports in the morning and people had a day to enjoy the beaches and activities, but this cruise only stopped at the ports at night. Were they trying to get out of some fees? Or what? It's been just a weird trip. The guests pretty much stayed in their rooms all day, or you may get a glimpse of them swiftly moving from their room to the theater room. I never saw them in the pool or the sports court. Something about this cruise just didn't sit right. On the 3rd Friday Brian and I decided to get together with one of the other guys, Charlie. He was pretty cool. The plan was to play some cards and have a couple drinks, and I'm not sure if we were out of it, but Charlie looked at his watch and noticed it was 11:01. He said let's head back, but he was nervous as the curfew had passed to be out of our rooms. Looking at us, Brian asked who would know. It's not like they have security cameras on the ship. We made a plan to leave through the west door, as it was less conspicuous. Brian let us out, I followed, then Charlie in the back. We tried to make our way quickly when we heard some footsteps around the next corner we were about to take. Luckily a supply cupboard was coming up, so we slipped inside. Being crammed in the closet with supplies and the other guys was difficult, as we had to be careful not to let anything fall or clink to draw any attention. We heard a low growl, and I don't know if I imagined it, but it was like a large hound was sniffing around the door in the hall that we just stepped out of. After a couple minutes of silence, Brian, the bravest of us, cracked the door and peeked. He looked back and whispered, "The coast is clear." As we emerged one by one we felt a vibration on the floor. Rounding the corner the growl became louder, as it sounds like something was barreling down the hallway we just left. This prompted us to sprint forward, trying to make it to our rooms. I guess my fight or flight kicked in, as I realized I was now leading the group. Making it to the final corridor I heard a thud behind me, but gripped with fear I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Opening the door to my room, I quickly flicked the latch and pretty much collapsed on the floor, frozen in fear. The next thing I knew I was awakened by the sun hitting me through the tiny porthole window in my cabin. After gathering myself I cautiously went towards Brian's door. Just then Mr. Burton turned up. "Mr. Miller, please join us in the employee common room for a brief meeting." I nervously walked off, wondering about everything. Are Brian and Charlie all right? Does Mr. Burton know that we were out past curfew? Arriving in the common room I saw most of the staff minus Brian and Charlie. Mr. Burton stepped in with Brian and asked us all to make the last day back to port a strong one. He handed us all our checks, and when he stepped out of the room I asked Brian where Charlie was. He said that before coming into the meeting Mr. Burton stated that Charlie seemed to have left in a life raft in the night. We decided to keep it to ourselves, and after making dock we counted and realized all the lifeboats were still attached. I told Brian the money was good, but I will not be returning for another trip.